Identifying an author's viewpoint is an important part of forming an argument. In order to make a claim about a topic, you have to have a particular opinion or a stance. This claim is then supported with evidence. Likewise, when you're looking at your sources, you have to make sure that you're evaluating what that author's stance is and whether or not it includes bias. So, what is bias? Simply put, bias is the preference or opinion preventing one from an objective or neutral viewpoint. This is important because in order to remain objective, you have to not only acknowledge your own bias, but make sure that you're evaluating your sources for bias. There's no getting around it. Everybody is a little bit biased. Even if you're just providing facts and information, you're giving a certain preference to one type of information over another. So think carefully about your biases. Are biases good or evil? I would argue that biases are only evil if you refuse to acknowledge them. You have to make sure that you're accounting for bias when you're looking at different sources. So how do you identify it? Well, bias is present if an author uses generalizations or broad statements, if they're using a little bit of evidence to make a large claim. If you're looking at exaggerations like hyperbole, overstatement, something where they're blowing things way out of proportion, that can also be a good indicator of bias. Likewise, connotations or emotionally charged language can be a good indicator of whether or not your source is being objective. For example, if you say that somebody is giving you advice, that has a positive connotation. But if you say that somebody is threatening you, that has a very negative connotation. Opinions are personal preference, and while they can be backed up by facts, typically opinions that are unsubstantiated can be entirely dismissed out of hand. And that's part of the reason why it's so important to evaluate the bias of your sources. So, what kind of biases can you detect? The media offers a lot of different examples of biases. But if you think about how the media tries to convince you using the three means of persuasion, logos, ethos, and pathos, then you're going to be a lot more difficult to sway and a lot less susceptible to bias. For example, logos is where the author uses a lot of logic or facts. Think about how many times you've been convinced by a statistic. These are the kinds of facts and logical conclusions that authors try to present in order to support their particular point. Also think about trust. Who do you trust? Ethos is the foundation for trust when you're trying to persuade an audience member. This is why you have to cite different sources in order to support your own authority. Because you're not an authority in the field, you have to rely on expert opinions to back up your claim. Finally, pathos or emotion can be very powerful. This is probably one of the most misused indicators of persuasion. So think about whether or not a commercial is funny, or if a commercial tries to tug on your heartstrings, that's pathos at work. Pathos is that human connection, the emotional means of persuasion, to try and get your reader to feel a certain way. And it can be very powerful when it's used correctly. But as I said, often it's misused, and that can lead to your audience feeling very manipulated and losing all sense of trust and credibility. If you have any questions about anything I've talked about in this presentation, please let me know. My cell phone's right there. In the meantime, let me know what your argument topic is going to be. I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys develop your means of persuasion, logos, ethos, and pathos, and what sources you bring to the fore.